All right, so despite absolutely not wanting to do this at all, I'm going to do it anyway. So I'm going to read about understanding stress and try to, this is the first video where it's like, this is too much. I'm not going to do any of the supplemental materials, but hopefully I can finish out all the required reading. If I mess up this week, I can't get everything done, I'm going to say that's okay. But let's take it one at a time and see how far I can get. So the first article is by Harvard Health Publications, Harvard Medical School, Trusted Advice for a Better Life. Understanding the stress response. Chronic activation of this survival mechanism impairs health. For 2 years in a row, the annual stress survey commissioned by the American Psychological Association has found that about 25% of Americans are experiencing high levels of stress, rating their stress level as 8 or more on a 10-point scale, while another 50% report moderate levels of stress, a score of 4 to 7. Perhaps not surprising given continuing economic instability in this country and abroad. Concerns about money, work, and the economy rank as the top sources of stress for Americans. Stress is unpleasant even when it is transient. A stressful situation, whether something environmental such as a looming work deadline, or psychological such as persistent worry about losing a job, can trigger a cascade of stress hormones that produce well-orchestrated physiological changes. A stressful incident can make the heart pound and breathing quicken, muscles tense, and beads of sweat appear. This combination of reactions to stress is also known as the fight or flight response because it evolved as a survival mechanism, enabling people and other mammals to react quickly to life-threatening situations. The carefully orchestrated yet near instantaneous sequence of hormonal changes and physiological responses helps someone to fight the threat off or flee to safety. Unfortunately, the body can also overreact to stressors that are not life-threatening, such as traffic jams, work pressure, and family difficulties. And I will say, I'm not sure when this was published, but I have read more about this, and when you think about it intuitively, fight or flight really doesn't make a lot of sense, because how many people like on an airplane just start beating people up, or like try to jump out of the airplane, right? It's like it's not fight or flight. Like that's not what happens. Majority what happens is freeze. People just freeze up. They don't know what to do. They're like a deer in the headlights. That's the most common response to stress. And you'll just have to take my word from that and kind of do your own research. But from what I've read, fight or flight is really the lesser of the fight or flight. Doesn't happen that often. The thing that happens most often is freezing. And intuitively, I think for most people that just makes sense. I mean, when's the last time you just saw a fight break out randomly? When's the last time you saw someone just running down the street because they were afraid? No, because that rarely happens. What happens is people just freeze up. Over the years, researchers have learned not only how and why these reactions occur, but have also gained insight into the long-term effects stress has on physical and psychological health. And I will say there's one thing too I've heard. There's also friend. If you get absolutely scared and stressed out, a survival mechanism for humans can neither be freezing, fighting, or flooding, but trying to win someone over or be overly charismatic. Over time, repeated activation of the stress response takes a toll on the body. Research suggests that prolonged stress contributes to high blood pressure, promotes the formation of artery clogging deposits, and causes brain changes that may contribute to anxiety, depression, and addiction. More preliminary research suggests that chronic stress may also contribute to obesity, and I think that's been the case with me for sure. Both through direct mechanisms causing people to eat more, or indirectly, decreasing sleep and exercise. Sounding the alarm. The stress response begins in the brain. See illustration. When someone confronts an oncoming car or other danger, the eyes or ears or both send the information to the amygdala, an area of the brain that contributes to emotional processing. The amygdala interprets the images and sounds. When it perceives danger, it instantly sends a distress signal to the hypothalamus. So here we have the command center, we have the hypothalamus, cerebral cortex, and the amygdala. When someone experiences a stressful event, the amygdala, an area of the brain that contributes to emotional processing, sends a distress signal to the hypothalamus. This area of the brain functions like a command center, communicating with the rest of the body through the nervous system so that the person has the energy to fight or flee. The hypothalamus is a bit like a command center. This area of the brain communicates with the rest of the body through the autonomic nervous system, which controls such involuntary body functions as breathing, blood pressure, heartbeat, and the dilation or constriction of key blood vessels and small airways in the lungs called bronchioles. The autonomic nervous system has two components: the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system functions like a gas pedal in a car. It triggers the fight or flight response, providing the body with a burst of energy so that it can respond to perceived dangers. The parasympathetic nervous system acts like a brake. It promotes the rest and digest response that calms the body down after the danger has passed. After the amygdala sends a distress signal, the hypothalamus activates the sympathetic nervous system by sending signals through the autonomic nerves to the adrenal glands. These glands respond by pumping the hormone epinephrine, also known as adrenaline, into the bloodstream. Or adrenaline, I guess. As epinephrine circulates through the body, it brings on a number of physiological changes. The heart beats faster than normal, pushing blood to the muscles, heart, and other vital organs. Pulse rate and blood pressure go up. The person undergoing these changes also starts to breathe more rapidly. Small airways in the lungs wide open. This way, the lungs can take in as much oxygen as possible with each breath. Extra oxygen is sent to the brain, increasing alertness. Sight, hearing, and other senses become sharper. Meanwhile, epinephrine I don't know. I think I might be getting this confused for something else. So let's get a pronunciation for this. Epinephrine.
Epinephrine.
Epinephrine. Epinephrine. Epinephrine. Okay, yeah. Now I've got it. Cool. There's a whole pronunciation tool there. I never used that before. That's awesome. Meanwhile, I forgot how to say it. Epinephrine. Oh.
Epinephrine.
There we go. So meanwhile, epinephrine triggers the release of blood sugar, glucose, and fats from temporary storage sites in the body. These nutrients flood into the bloodstream, supplying energy to all parts of the body. All of these changes happen so quickly that people aren't aware of them. In fact, the wiring is so efficient that the amygdala and hypothalamus start this cascade even before the brain's visual centers have had a chance to fully process what's happening. That's why people are able to jump out of the path of an oncoming car even before they think of what they are doing. As the initial surge of epinephrine subsides, the hypothalamus activates the second component of the stress response system known as the HPA axis. This network consists of the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the adrenal glands. The HPA axis relies on a series of hormonal signals to keep the sympathetic nervous system, the gas pedal, pressed down. If the brain continues to perceive something as dangerous, the hypothalamus releases corticotropin-releasing hormone, CRH, which travels to the pituitary gland, triggering the release of adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH. This hormone travels to the adrenal glands, prompting them to release cortisol. The body thus stays revved up and on high alert. When the threat passes, cortisol levels fail. The parasympathetic nervous system, the brake, then dampens the stress response. Techniques to counter stress. The findings of the national survey mentioned earlier support what mental health clinicians experience in their own practices. Many people are unable to find a way to put the brakes on stress. Chronic low-level stress keeps the HPA axis activated, much like a motor that is idling too high for too long. After a while, this has an effect on the body that contributes to the health problems associated with chronic stress. Persistent epinephrine surges can damage blood vessels and arteries, increasing blood pressure and raising risk of heart attacks or strokes. Elevated cortisol levels create physiological changes that help to replenish the body's energy stores and that are depleted during the stress response. But they inadvertently contribute to the buildup of fat tissue and to weight gain. For example, cortisol increases appetite, so people will want to eat to obtain more energy. It also increases storage of unused nutrients as fat. Fortunately, people can learn techniques to counter the stress response. Relaxation response. Dr. Herbert Benson, Director Emeritus of the Benson Henry Institute for Mind-Body Medicine at Massachusetts General Hospital, has devoted much of his career to learning how people can counter the stress response by using a combination of approaches that elicit the relaxation response. These include deep abdominal breathing, focus on a soothing word, such as peace or calm, visualization of tranquil scenes, repetitive prayer, yoga, and Tai Chi. Most of the research using objective measures to evaluate how effective the relaxation response is at countering stress have been conducted in people with hypertension or other forms of heart disease. Those results suggest the technique may be worth trying, although for most people it is not a cure-all. For example, researchers at Massachusetts General Hospital conducted a double-blind, randomized controlled trial of 122 patients with hypertension, ages 55 and older, in which half were assigned to relaxation response training and the other half to a control group that received information about blood pressure control. After 8 weeks, 34 of the people who practiced the relaxation response, a little more than half, had achieved a systolic blood pressure reduction of more than 5 and what is that unit? Millimeters per mercury pillar. Millimeters per. I think the H stands for mercury, right? Mercury pillar. Hg is mercury pillar, right? Am I right about that? Ah, dang it. Oh, okay. Okay, yeah. So the pillar there, but it stands for millimeters of mercury. It is a unit of measure, and it represents the pressure exerted. So it's your blood pressure. It's like how like high can it push mercury up? So if it can push it up too high, then your blood pressure is too high. All right. So, and we're therefore eligible for this. This is why I use lead in all my blood pressure measurements, because then I have blood pressure that's very low. And we're therefore eligible for the next phase of the study, in which they could reduce levels of blood pressure medication they were taking. During that second phase, 50% were able to eliminate at least one blood pressure medication, significantly more than in the control group, where only 19% eliminated their medication. Physical activity. People can use exercise to stifle the buildup of stress in several ways. Exercise, such as taking a brisk walk shortly after feeling stressed, not only deepens breathing, but also helps relieve muscle tension. Movement therapies such as yoga, tai chi, and qigong combine fluid movements with deep breathing and mental focus, all of which can induce calm. Social support. Confidants, friends, acquaintances, coworkers, relatives, spouses, and companions all provide a life-enhancing social net, which may increase longevity. It's not clear why, but the buffering theory holds that people who enjoy close relationships with family and friends receive emotional support that indirectly helps to sustain them at times of stress and crisis. Wow, okay. Way to slap me in the face with that one. All right, but anyways, this was from 2000 to 2003. So I think there were probably some updates. So let's ask. Have there been any updates to dates to the concepts in this article? Now there should be, so there have been some noticeable updates. So the role of the gut-brain axis and how stress affects gut health, which remember they did talk about. They said that it can shut down the digestive process, but not only that, it can lead to dysbiosis, inflammation, and even cognitive and emotional disturbances. So dysbiosis is a condition that causes it's an imbalance in the type of gut bacteria. Chronic stress contributes to psychiatric disorders and inflammatory diseases. So the gut's production of serotonin. So there's more about how it affects the gut. What about the idea of fight or flight? Is that kind of an outdated idea? From what I understand, from what I've read, it'd be more accurate to call it a freezing response, because both fight and flight are not very common responses. By and far, the most common response is to just freeze. But even that, there might be even more responses than just fight, flight, or freeze, such as friend, where you become overly charismatic when you are really feeling stressed or threatened or in danger. Yeah. Right, yeah. So it's evolved. Modern research acknowledges that it can be more complex. Freeze is a common reaction where you feel immobilized by fear. And there's also a fawning or friend, where you become overly accommodating or charismatic to try to kind of win someone over and diffuse the threat. So those, it's really not just a flight or flight. So tell me, rank them by order, and if it's more than just friend, fight, flight, or freeze, include the additional ones that are mentioned in the research. Act as a PhD researcher and include all of the relevant ones, and then rank them by which is the most common response and which is the least. Okay, so the five Fs. So freezing is the most common. Flight, attempting to escape. Fawn comes before fight, so becoming overly accommodating to avoid conflict, and then flight. And you kind of think, that makes sense too. If someone's trying to steal your wallet, you're probably going to try to be like, hey, you really want to do this? Come on, here, I've got $20 in my wallet. Why don't you just take the money and let me keep the wallet? How's that? You're not going to just get into a fight with them, right? So fight or flight really, if you think about your own experience, and it really doesn't describe the stress response very well. The most common is freeze, where individuals become immobilized when threatened. And then the second most common is the flight, attempting to escape. But fight is actually less common than fawning, becoming overly accommodating to avoid conflict. Okay, and then flop, complete physical collapse, common in extreme fear. So yeah, you could literally faint. Fainting is something that happens a lot as well. And then submit, appeasement, or passive surrender, just doing what they say, even if it's and it's different from friending, because it's just eventually. And this is where it gets tricky too, because sometimes victims can act as though they are a willful participant and not just a victim, due to this sort of response here. All right, so the categories reflect the complexity of how humans cope with stress, and further research continues to explore additional nuances in these responses. And I'm not a doctor. This is just my opinion, and I'm straying off course. So let me try to refocus here, and hopefully I can get all this reading done. All right, so same agency, but another article. This is Harnessing the Upsides of Stress. Changing your mindset doesn't mean taking a Pollyanna view of the world. I don't know what that means. The key isn't to deny stress, but to recognize and acknowledge it, and then to find the upside. Because a full throttle fight or flight response is not the only possible reaction to stress, at least when the stress does not involve a potentially life-threatening situation. And remember, there is more than just a flight, but the idea is any of these. Freezing, and how nice would it be if you didn't just freeze up, right? If you could proceed in a more useful way than just freezing up and becoming immobilized. So it's all of those could be. None of these are the only possible reaction to stress. In people with a more stress-hardy mindset, the stress response is often tempered by the challenge response, which accounts for the so-called excite and delight experience that some people have in stressful situations, such as skydiving. Like the typical stress response, the challenge response also reflects the cardiovascular system, but also of constricting blood vessels and ramping up inflammation in anticipation of wounds. It allows for maximum blood flow, much like exercise. The balance of hormones is different too, including more DHEA. Another modification to the stress response is called the trend and befriend. Okay, that's interesting. This is a modification. Oh, this is interesting. I actually didn't read this. So these are alternatives. these are healthier ways to respond to stress. So in people with a more stress-hardy mindset, the stress response is often tempered by the challenge response, which accounts for a so-called excite and delight experience that some people have in stressful situations, such as skydiving. Like the typical stress response, the challenge response also affects the cardiovascular system, but instead of constricting blood vessels and ramping up inflammation in anticipation of wounds, it allows for maximum blood flow, much like exercise. The balance of hormones is different too, including more DHA. So this is what violinist Hilary Hahn was talking about. She has a excite and delight challenge sort of response when it comes to the stress of giving live performances. Another modification to the stress response is called tend and befriend. It explains why after September 11 terrorist attacks in 2021, of which the anniversary will be in a few days, the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing, or the 2016 massacre at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, and many more after that, unfortunately, people feel the need to reach out to friends and relatives in the community to assure themselves that loved ones were all right, to comfort the distressed or bereaved, and to shore up social networks. Connecting in this way actually helps reduce stress as opposed to, say, watching an endless loop of TV coverage. That's because tend and befriend also involves different balances of hormones, in particular increased levels of oxytocin, which enhances bonding between a mother and a child or between sexual partners, for example. It makes the brain's reward centers more responsive to social contact, and it is an important part of resilience. Dialing back from full-on fight or flight can be simply a matter of changing your mindset. Studies have shown that when participants are told you're the kind of person whose performance improves under pressure, it does, by as much as 1/3. How can you shift your perspective? A 2015 book called The Upside of Stress by Kelly McGonigal gives multiple ideas. Here are just a few suggestions. When you notice a racing heart, for example, before you give a presentation or initiate a tough conversation, realize that your body is trying to give you more energy and see if you can capitalize on that. If you can also use the stop method, that might help. If you are feeling nervous, pause to consider why and ask yourself if it's because you're doing something that matters to you and therefore reinforces your values and gives meaning to your life. Don't deny the stress, but redirect your energy away from it and toward the task at hand. If you are feeling overwhelmed with work or cares, try doing some small act of kindness for someone and note the mental reward you reap. Nurture your social networks. Caring creates resilience. Try to focus on the larger purpose of whatever you're doing. When you're stuck in a traffic jam taking your daughter to school, remember that it's because you love her and want to get her a good education. Whatever you're doing, don't pretend that stress doesn't exist. People who deny it tend to isolate themselves and reinforce their fears. Instead, ask yourself why you're experiencing this stress and look for any positive aspects to it. Are you learning something from it? Are you gaining strength? Are you connecting with people on a more fundamental level? Do you feel more intensely alive? So that's a good point. Remember that one of the healthy ways to respond to stress is tend and befriend. So, that might be why people are so isolated in U.S. society nowadays, so much more than before, because they're just not responding to stress in a healthy way. They're not taking time to tend and befriend. That's a good insight. I'm glad I read this article. All right, so moving on to let's have a brief conversation about this with ChatGPT, because So, in reading this article, I kind of learned some new things about stress. I already knew about the positive response where you can reframe it as like exciting. Like, for example, violinist Hilary Hahn has talked about that before, where when she gives a performance, she sees it as a challenge. So she becomes excited and delighted by being able to have this experience, and she doesn't experience it as a negative thing. She's glad for her stage response because it helps her to play better. So the other thing I learned about was this tend and befriend sort of healthy response. Can you tell me more about that? So instead of isolating or going into fight or flight, or any of these other ones that we saw up here, freezing, and I feel like this would very much cause isolation too. If you're just freezing, you're just kind of sitting, not calling anyone, not checking in, not doing anything like that. You're going to end up pretty isolated. So this is probably a good alternative to the freeze response. So the tend and befriend response is a healthy stress reaction, where instead of going into fight or flight, people seek social connections and support. This response is often driven by the hormone oxytocin, which promotes bonding and social contact. It encourages individuals to reach out to others, comfort in those in distress, and strengthen their social networks, reducing stress. This behavior can lead to resilience, as social connections act as a buffer against negative impacts of stress, enhancing well-being and emotional support. So yeah, that was okay. I felt like I'd learned something new, because I always knew that happens in stressful people kind of reach out to one another, but I didn't know that it was scientifically documented as a healthy response to stress. All right, so that is that. I got this all read, so very nearly finishing this up. We just got one more to go, and then we've got the midway assessment. So last article, the opportunity of the magic quarter second. Pausing, making use of the magic quarter second, choosing to be present. This is 2015, Tara Branch, so it's almost 10 years old now, because 2015 is a long time ago. It's not like literally 2 years before I moved from my hometown. But So in the book, My Stroke of Insight, brain scientist Jill Bolte Taylor explains that the natural lifespan of an emotion, the average time it takes for it to move through the nervous system and body, is only a minute and a half, a mere 90 seconds. After that, we need thoughts to help keep the emotion rolling. So if we wonder why we lock into painful emotional states like anxiety, depression, or rage, we need look no further than our own endless stream of inner dialogue. Modern neuroscience has discovered a fundamental truth. Neurons that fire together wire together. When we rehearse a looping set of thoughts and emotions, we create deeply grooved patterns of emotional reactivity. This means that the more you think and rethink about certain experiences, the stronger the memory and the more easily activated the related feelings become. For example, if a young girl asks her father for help and he either ignores her or reacts with irritation, the emotional pain of rejection may become linked with any number of thoughts or beliefs. I am not loved. I am not worth helping. I am weak for wanting help. It is dangerous to ask for help. He's bad. I hate him. The more the child gets this response from either parent, or even images, or even imagines getting this response, the more the impulse to ask for help becomes paired with the belief that she will be refused, and the accompanying feelings, fear or hurt, anger or shame. Years later, she may hesitate to ask for help at all, or if she does and the other person so much as pauses or looks distracted, the old feelings instantly take over. She downplays her needs, apologizes, or becomes enraged. Unless we learn to recognize and interpret our compulsive thinking, these ingrained emotional and behavioral patterns continue to strengthen over time. Fortunately, it is possible to break out of this patterning. Researcher Benjamin Libet discovered that the part of the brain responsible for movement activates a quarter second before we become aware of our intention to move. There is then another quarter second before the movement begins. So it takes a half a second. So what does this mean? First, it casts an interesting light on what we call free will. Before we make a conscious decision, our brain has already set the gears in motion. But secondly, it offers us an opportunity. Say you've been obsessing about having a cigarette. During the space between impulse, I need to smoke a cigarette, and action, reaching for the pack, there's a room for choice. Oh, I thought this was saying the literal opposite. Author Tara Bennett Goldman named the space the magic quarter second. Mindfulness enables us to take advantage of it. So I thought this was saying literally the opposite, where by the time you say I need to smoke a cigarette, you already have a cigarette in your hand going to your mouth. I thought that's what this was saying. So the part of the brain responsible for movement activates a quarter second before we become aware of our intention to move. But then you have another quarter second where your movement begins, but once that movement begins, now you've got that quarter second where your brain has become unlocked. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna reach for that cigarette. But once your arms start moving and once you're like, oh, I'm touching, there's a point, there's a quarter second where it'll come online. So as you're taking that cigarette out, as you're putting it to your lips, you've got a lot of time to think, hey, like, do I want to do this? And then, when you go and buy cigarettes, you've got a lot of time to be like, well, I don't want to have access to these, so I'm not going to buy them. So, so by catching our thoughts, so say you've been obsessing about having cigarettes, mindfulness enables us to take advantage of the moment your mind comes online, which is already a step behind. By catching our thoughts in the magic quarter second, we're able to act from a wiser place, interpreting the circling of compulsive thinking that fuels anxiety and other painful emotions. For example, if our child asks us to play a game and we automatically think, I'm too busy, we might pause and choose to spend some time with her. If we've been caught up in composing an angry email, we might pause and decide not to press the send button. The Buddha taught that to be free, not identified with or possessed by thoughts or feelings, we need to investigate each and every part of our experience with an intimate and mindful attention. The first step is pausing, making use of the magic quarter second, and the second, choosing to be present with our moment-to-moment experience. We need to recognize the fear-based thoughts and tension in our bodies with an accepting, curious, and kind attention. The fruit of this presence is a capacity to release habitual reactivity, respond to our life circumstances with a wiser heart, and step out of the grip of oppressive emotions. So my main hobby has been and continues to be juggling, and this kind of made me think, because juggling is movement. So like I feel like I have a lot of good insights when it comes to how movement works and like tracking and stuff. And one of the things that can really help is to just freeze. Just you're going, and then you freeze and you intentionally drop and you don't do anything else. And then you look, where are my feet? Where are my hands? Well, if you're trying to juggle with, all like skewed and about and not in like a position, if you have one hand higher than the other, if you have one knee, your legs are crossed for whatever reason, it's not going to go so well. But, a lot of that stuff happens completely unconsciously. So you really got to train yourself to have the right kinds of movements happen automatically. You have to, so that's kind of my take on that. Although I feel like I didn't, the word grok is very useful to me. I feel like I didn't grok that appropriately. I didn't completely grok that, but it's yeah. So I guess that didn't resonate too well with me. Let's get a little bit of assistance from ChatGPT on it, and I'll say exactly that. So I feel like I didn't completely grok this, if you know what that means. GROCK. Have you heard of that word before? I feel like I just didn't have that feeling where like I completely understood it, like in the way that, the word grok would imply. So like, can you help me do that briefly? Okay, so think of it as a tiny but powerful moment between an impulse, like wanting to react, and the actual action. In that moment, mindfulness can help you pause and choose how to respond rather than automatically reacting. By using this impulse, you can break out of harmful patterns. It does, but I'm like very, very, very skeptical of this idea because I've struggled with like ordering too much food out and like gaining over 100 pounds. And like, I'm not mindlessly doing this. Like I'm mindfully like it would take me like an hour to place an order because I would be going over in my mind like, oh, I don't want to do this. Please don't let me do this. Oh, I hope I don't do this. But then I do it anyway. So it's like, I feel like this idea that like, if you just become more present in the moment, you can choose how to respond. Like, I just feel like that's not true. I feel like it's more of a result of like the circumstance. Like if the fire alarm went off and like I had to evacuate my apartment, then I probably wouldn't order food. But like if I just think about it and am mindful, like eventually it's gonna get me, like, right? Like it's not that I'm not conscious of what I'm doing. It's that I know it's wrong and I do it anyway. Yeah. 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 So cognitive dissonance. Yeah. Yeah, so this is what I mean. Perfect. Yeah, this is what I mean. It's like I feel like mindfulness is not enough, and I feel like this article kind of gives people a false impression that all you have to do is be mindful. But you really said it right when you said what you need is environmental changes, habit restructuring, and perhaps even professional support. So yeah, I think you really helped me to understand this better. They're just making a point about mindfulness that honestly I think should be taken with a grain of salt. But I think there is some validity in the point that in order to do more effective interventions, such as mentioned environment changes, habit restructuring, and professional support, you do need to have that. You do need to have that like mindfulness to recognize that you do actually have a problem and you want to change it. Like that's helped for me in like my losing weight. It's like I'm really mindful of how miserable being obese is making me. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, so it's about choosing how you perceive. So like, even okay. All right, so that makes sense. It's about choosing how you proceed. So like even if you're mindful of this bad habit you have of smoking cigarettes, and you go and you do it anyway, even though you know you should not, and in fact you do not want to do it, but you do it anyway as if you are possessed by some sort of cigarette smoking demon, you can recognize certain facts of what might be true, such as you might be addicted, and you can kind of choose how to proceed then. You can look into things like cigarette cessation, addiction services, stuff like that. So, okay, I feel like I understand it a lot better now. Thank you so much. Yeah. So it's just one piece of the puzzle. It's the first step. It's about choosing how to proceed. So even though you might not have that immediate choice to say, I'm not going to have this cigarette, you have a broader choice to say, I'm going to sign up for smoking cessation addiction services. All right. So that brings me to the absolute last part, which is the midway self-assessment. And then we're on to week 5. So far, you have experienced the 3 main formal practices: body scans, sitting meditation, yoga, and a number of informal practices, which are great because they give you tools you can use in your life, especially the STOP method. Simple awareness, mindful eating, present awareness of pleasant/unpleasant experiences, stop /1 minute breathing space. Even though you won't be sharing this with anyone else, well, except for the entire internet from now until the end of time, it can be helpful to, and literally, that might be used to train as part of training data for an all-powerful AI. It can be helpful to actually write down your thoughts at this point, reflecting on your personal leanings as well as the things you may still be struggling with. A likely outcome of this awareness and active appreciation will be a strengthening and reinforcement that can naturally carry forward to the end of this course and beyond. So, what do you notice already starting to happen? What are you encouraged by? So, I do feel a lot less like social anxiety. I have been noticing that for sure. Oops. So the midway assessment is in another document. So I'll open that. There we go. And then I'll close the one I opened by mistake and leave my answer. So I did notice experiencing less social anxiety, encouraged by ability to complete yoga, been wanting to establish a home workout routine. What else did I notice? I noticed the sitting meditation become easier. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be complicated. What is not happening yet? What are you still struggling with? That's a great question. That's a really good question. I guess I still mess up my diet plan sometimes. Still am not 100% perfect with my eating, whatever that means. It's kind of meaningless. What is perfect eating? But I mean, honestly, I am 100% perfect with my eating because I haven't died from malnutrition yet. So that seems like a win to me. Okay, so what is not happening yet? What are you still struggling with? Still haven't knocked off any from my list of tech certifications. And then what else am I struggling? I feel like this Tend and befriend. Response is very much lacking. I feel like I should make an effort to do that better. And then struggle to remember and implement stop exercise. Let's see here. What else am I struggling with? Not much. I mean, life really isn't that bad. Yeah, things are going good. So I'm gonna move on to the next one. Take a moment to see if you can recall a specific incident in your life that stands out that somehow relates to the work you have done so far in the course. If no incident comes immediately to mind, it might be helpful to review your informal practice worksheets. What was the situation and what happened? So yeah, it was a bathing suit boat party. And what happened was I had fun. Didn't have anxiety. Didn't bite my nails. Swam and had a great time. Yeah, which is kind of big for me. Normally during those things I would really feel a lot of anxiety and feel like I like wasn't doing it right in some way, which is not fun. All right. So there we go. That's the end of week 4. Hey, I'm gonna give myself a golf clap. That is amazing. I almost didn't get that done. So unfortunately, I didn't get through any of these supplemental materials. They do look kind of interesting. I might just on my own watch some of the videos. But yeah, the first article is very long, so I'm not going to be able to get through that. There's just a lot of pretty dense, long articles in here. And then not only that, we have seen that some of this is out of date. This I think this was first posted online way like a long time ago. Like a lot of these articles have timestamps in them. Like the earliest timestamp I saw was like 2015. So, there's been a lot of steady advancement since. For example, the fight or flight really isn't accurate. It's more like 6 different unique responses that happens. And the most common response is neither fight nor flight. It's freeze. So that is very much out of date. So a lot of this is probably out of date as well. So it probably does make sense to skip some of this. So yeah, that's it. I got the essence of week 4. I did all the videos. I did all the reading. I did all my formal and informal practices. So stay tuned for the next video starting tomorrow. Which is week 5, starting the second half of the course, finishing this thing out. We're going to learn how to deal with difficult emotions or physical pain. So thanks for watching and stay tuned for the next one.